Hi guys, welcome back to yet another fun DIY video here about good old Athena. A quick little heads up, there is going to be a fair amount of yammering on before we actually get started, and also in the end of this video I'm going to sum up a bunch of tips and tricks for applying barrier coat, so if you need to do that to your hull, definitely stay tuned for those. This is going to be the fifth and final episode in my little Osmosis series here about Athena. First, my girlfriend Ava and I spent a lovely week laying up an extra layer of glass on the entire hull below the waterline. That was a lot of work, but also a lot of fun. Then I spent a couple of lovely weeks ferrying the hull, which was, needless to say, also a lot of work. Depending on the condition of your hull, you might be able to skip those two steps and go straight to the application of the barrier coat, which is what we'll be doing in this video. But that all depends on, like I said, the condition of your hull and also how ambitious you are. If you want your hull to be absolutely, truly perfect, you can look forward to spending an obscene amount of time ferrying and sanding. In my case, I've reached the intersection between I want her to look good and I can't really afford to spend any more time on this. So she is not perfect, but she's good enough, and that's okay. In 5 to 6 weeks, I need to be ready to move out of the shed. I still have some extra glass to lay up here in the cockpit. I need to finish ferrying the sides of the cabin tub. I need to paint the entire deck. I need to put down non-skid. There's a lot of stuff left on the to-do list, and that's why I'm out of time when it comes to ferrying. But let's get back to the task at hand, applying the barrier coat. The process for doing that is outlined in this manual from Wessex. There's a bunch of stuff about osmosis, how to dry out the hull, and just in general, a bunch of very useful information in this manual. And on a little side note, the manuals and the instructions from Wessex are one of the primary reasons I first started using Wessex, because their manuals and their technical support is just simply second to none. Let's start at the very beginning. You might be wondering, what the heck is a barrier coat and what is it good for? It is a coating that goes on the outside of the hull, and its sole purpose is to protect the laminate that makes up the hull from moisture. Real short, what we want to do is to protect against osmosis. And if you're more curious about that topic, go ahead and click the link for this manual that I've included in the description and flip to page 2. 105 epoxy on its own is a good moisture barrier, but in this video we're going to be using an additive called 422, and that takes that ability to be a moisture barrier and just turns the volume all the way up to 11. And it also makes the coating just a little bit more abrasion resistant. Now would be an excellent time to mention that the products I'm going to be applying to the hull and the tools I'm going to be using to do that, and I'll show you all of those in just a second. All of those tools and products are sponsored by two companies, HF Industry and Marine right here in Denmark, and Wessex Resins and Adhesives in the UK. There are links for both those companies in the description down below. What you'll need for the barrier coat is some 105 epoxy resin, a hardener, either 205 or 206 depending on the temperature you're working in, and it never hurts to have an extra set of these pumps lying around. You'll need the 422 barrier coat additive as well as some kind of container to mix everything in. For the application of the barrier coat, I'm going to be using Wessex 7-inch roller frames in combination with their roller covers. On a quick little side note, these things are awesome for when dealing with epoxy because they don't hold a lot of epoxy. And with epoxy, if you have a big mass of it clumped together, it's going to kick off really quick. And this only holds a little bit. As you can see, the foam is quite thin, and that means you'll have longer working time with these rollers. Of course, we need some kind of tray to hold the epoxy in, and for that we're going to be using these metal ones with a plastic liner in them. These are great because it's a lot cheaper to buy a bunch of these liners compared to the regular plastic trays, and also by using the liners we are generating a little bit less waste. And then we've got the usual suspects, some safety glasses, some gloves, and even some gloves that are slightly more appropriate for when working with epoxy. But these are quite thick, so it can be difficult to work with them on. But they're an option for the guys that are going to help me tomorrow. Along with a bit of masking tape, preferably the stuff from 3M, that is basically all you need, bare bones. But I'm going to have a few guys here to help me tomorrow, like I mentioned. In an attempt to try and boost morale, because tomorrow is going to be a very long day, I've added a few optional extras. We've got candy, chips, coffee, sodas, beers, and a bit of music. Oh, and also apparently a new sharp cat. I mentioned that tomorrow is going to be a long day, and that is an excellent segue into hardener selection, because hardener selection is very important. I want to point out that in your case, hardener selection might be very easy. You might be located somewhere where it's very warm or somewhere where it's very cold. That will dictate what hardener you should go with. But in my case, the temperature is just all over the place right now. We have days where it's 14 degrees Celsius and we have days where it's over 25 degrees Celsius. At 14 degrees Celsius, I would definitely go ahead and use the fast hardener, the one that's called 205, because 206, which is the slow hardener, only cures down to 16 degrees Celsius or 60 degrees Fahrenheit, so that would never cure on a cold day. And then on the other hand, on a warm day, say above 25 degrees Celsius, trying to use 205 would be, well, a little bit of a stretch. You might run into a situation where the coat you've just applied has cured before you can get the next one on, and that is very bad news. Life is going to be a lot easier if you choose the right hardener, because the barrier coat needs to go on wet on tacky, meaning the coat you've just applied needs to be tacky before you apply the next coat. But if the coat you've applied is no longer tacky, then there's only really one thing left to do, and that is to let it cure fully, say wait a day or two, come back, wash it down to get rid of any amine blush, then sand it to key the surface, and then you're ready to start applying more barrier coat. Now, I don't know about you guys, but for me, doing an extra 50 square meters worth of sanding doesn't really sound like that much fun. This is what happens when you mix resin and hardener. First, you reach what's known as the open time. That's the time you've got for mixing the epoxy, getting everything applied and smoothed out. After that, you reach the gel state. And for the first part of the gel phase, the coating is still tacky. And as you can see here, it says OK to recoat. When it stops being tacky, well, that's when you've got a problem. By reapplying when the previous coat is still tacky, we're going to get a strong chemical bond between the two coats. So the goal is to hit this spot right here. Tacky is our friend. To choose the right hardener, I've been keeping a very close eye on the weather forecast. And it looks like tomorrow is going to be overcast, so we're not going to have the sun beating down on the shed. And the temperatures are going to be between 15 and 19 degrees Celsius. I am going to gamble and go with the fast hardener. In the hopes of applying all of the barrier coat in one day, I have been fortunate enough to enlist the help of a couple of friends. They're going to show up around 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, but for us to get a running start to the day and hopefully be able to finish in, like I said, one day, I'm going to have to take care of all of the prep work today. Before we remove the last little bit of anti-fouling on the hull, Eva and I use some masking tape and a pencil line to just temporarily move the waterline about 2 inches up the side of the hull. I've already gone ahead and lowered that again. I used some cheap flexible cutting board from IKEA to make a suitable size spacer. I then lined that up with the pencil line up on the masking tape and drew the new waterline. I've traced that line all the way around the hull, so I'm almost ready to start putting up some masking tape. But before I do that, I'm just going to wipe down the area with a tack cloth to get rid of any dust. That should limit the chances of the epoxy creeping up underneath the masking tape. And there we go. That was one layer of masking tape, but I'm actually going to apply a second layer. This layer is going to get removed after 3 coats of barrier coat, and this one is going to get removed after the 6th and final coat. This second layer of masking tape is going to overlap the first layer by 3 or 5 millimeters. It's not terribly important as long as there is a little bit of overlap. Something like that. There is the teeny tiniest bit of weeble wobble in the masking tape, but that's perfectly okay. All of the barrier coat is going to get covered by copper coat next weekend, and you won't ever be able to see the barrier coat. In addition to masking off the waterline, I've also masked off around each of the 3 stands. I say 3 stands because the 4th stand is going to get lowered. Now, had I been smart about this, I would have taken the time to build some kind of structure to support the boat so that I could have lowered all 4 stands at once. That way I wouldn't have had to come back and deal with those 3 areas later on. The last week and a half have honestly just been a hazy, blurry, fairing, sanding extravaganza, so I haven't had time to build any kind of support, so we'll just have to do it this way instead. Now, I think there's only one more thing left to do before we're ready for tomorrow. And that is to figure out a fast and easy way of measuring out 422. West System calls for between 15 and 20% by weight, but using scales is slow and cumbersome. Tomorrow we are going to have a bunch of these cups pre-pumped with 10 pumps of resin. So if we can figure out how much 10 pumps of resin and hardener weighs, then we should be able to trim one of these to a size where I can simply just scoop one of those out, and that should be the correct amount of 422 for 10 pumps. I've gone ahead and zeroed out my scale with 2 empty cups. 10 pumps of hardener. And that's 10 pumps of resin. Let's pop them on here, and let's say 250 grams. So we've got 250 grams. To get 10% of that, we just move the decimal point 1 place. That gives us 25 grams. That is 10%. 20% would be, let's say, 50 grams. The resin and hardener I used to measure with, we'll just go ahead and put back in the containers. Let's see how much 422 we need to get to those 50 grams. Okay, I am going to go ahead and call 49 close enough. If I go ahead and cut the plastic cup along this masking tape, that should give me 50 grams quick and easy. Can I get a drum roll, please? Yeah, that's close enough. I've gone ahead and made a few tests just to check the accuracy of my little cup here, and it appears to be within a few grams, so that's perfectly fine. I've also just checked the manual to make sure, and it's actually not 15 to 20% 422, it's 20 to 25%, but 50 grams should still be perfectly fine. Everything is prepped, and I'm about as ready for tomorrow as I'm gonna get. I'm gonna head back to Obelix, read the manual a few more times, and get a good night's sleep before tomorrow. But I'll see you guys bright and early tomorrow morning. Good morning, guys. It is Saturday morning. Today is the big day. And look who's being a good sweatshop owner and has brought his minions breakfast and pastries. My awesome helpers, aka the minions, are going to show up in around 20 minutes. So until then, I can go ahead and check the weather forecast one last time, and it looks like it is going to be between 15 and 19 degrees Celsius today and overcast like I mentioned yesterday. Also, I can go ahead and just check the hull one last time, just to make absolutely sure I haven't missed any spots when sanding, and also just to double check that the masking tape is well adhered. It looks like everything is in order. While I'm waiting for the minions to show up, I might as well go ahead and pre-pump some cups of resin. Here we go, my helpers have arrived and they're busy mixing up epoxy. Let's go ahead and get started. We've got a bunch of cups pre-pumped with 10 pumps of resin in each cup, and one of those cups should cover roughly 2 square meters. Through the magic of guesswork, we've come up with a roughly 2 meter square area of the hull here. That's the first area we're going to cover, and we're going to use that as a little bit of a sample area just to make sure that we don't put on too little or too much epoxy. You guys might recognize Thomas from last summer when he helped me rebuild the deck. We are using the roller to apply the epoxy, and then we're using a roller cut in half to tip the surface to get rid of any air bubbles. This first coat is just plain epoxy. There's no 422 added, and the purpose of this first coat is just to make sure we get a really good bond between the hull and the barrier coat. It looks like we were spot on with the 2 square meters, so that's awesome. Now let's get busy. Okay, er du klar til dump? And that is the first coat of epoxy applied. Now we get to sit around and wait for an hour and a half maybe until it's tacky. Looking at the surface, it looks like the guys did a good job. There aren't any air bubbles here, and that's important because if there are air bubbles, that significantly lowers the performance of the barrier coat. And just like that, we are done applying the first coat. As you can see, it doesn't look great. It's kind of see-through and a little bit patchy, but that's okay. That is to be expected. We've had a short break and are all fueled up on coffee and candy, so let's get back to work. We're still working on the second coat with additive here on the port side, but the starboard side has 2 full coats with 422. As you can see, the color over here is starting to look a lot more solid, and I'd say in another 1 or 2 coats it's going to be completely solid. Of course, it doesn't matter at all because it's all going to get covered by cover coat. We only just finished applying the second coat with additive, and we're already ready to start on the third coat. I would say 3 people is the bare minimum for doing a boat this size. I'm not going to lie, today has been pretty hectic and I wish I would have had more time to talk to you guys during the process. But at least the result is pretty dang spiffy. Ta-da! That looks pretty freaking awesome if you ask me. We still have 1 final coat to get on there, but yeah, we are almost done. We've reached a very important milestone. We are done applying barrier coat to the starboard side of the boat, and that means I can go ahead and remove the last bit of masking tape. And it's official. We are done. Good morning, guys. It is Sunday morning. I've mentioned this a number of times in the past, but one of my favorite things about DIY is when you come back the day after having done a big job, you see the work you did and you just instantly start smiling. Today would very much be one of those days. I mean, hubba, look at this hull. This is pretty dang spiffy. I mean, if this is not worth a thumbs up, I have no idea what is. And over here on the port side, she is also looking a solid 9.7 out of 10. Like I mentioned a little earlier, I would say 3 people is the bare minimum for doing a boat this size. It was a long 12-hour day and we were all busy all the time. So I didn't get as much of a chance as I would have liked to sort of keep you guys in the loop while things were happening. As far as the application of the barrier coat, that was very straightforward, certainly nothing to be afraid of. But as with any work that involves epoxy, it pays to plan ahead, because once you start, you are committed, and having thought things through in advance is, well, I would say crucial. Let's run through a few tips and tricks for applying the barrier coat. Time is of the essence, so setting up an area where you've got everything you could possibly need throughout the day is a good first step. That way you don't have to go searching for stuff. If you're wondering how much epoxy, how much 422, how many pairs of gloves, how many rollers, how many roller frames you need for your size boat, go ahead and open the Gel Coat and Blisters manual from Wessex and flip to the very last page. There you'll find estimates for various lengths of boats. Very useful. But do yourself a favor and pick up a bunch of extra rollers, extra frames, extra gloves for that matter, because imagine you only just had enough rollers and you were halfway through the process and you accidentally dropped your roller on the ground. That would be less than ideal. A 10 pump cup of resin, hardener and the appropriate amount of 422 should cover roughly 2 square meters, but that is just a guide. Keep an eye on the surface to make sure you don't get runs, and make sure you use up all the material you've purchased for your boat. The end goal is to get a layer thickness of roughly 20 mils or 600 microns. When in doubt when mixing resin and hardener, make sure you count to 120 while you're mixing. That should make sure that it's mixed thoroughly. Not thoroughly mixing the resin and the hardener would be very, very bad. In this manual, Wessex shows a foam roller cut in half for tipping the surface, like this one, and that's what we used, and it worked out great. But in the manual, they show a little homemade handle attached to this, and well, we didn't actually need the handle, we just grabbed this with our fingers and dragged it down the surface, and that worked out fine. When applying masking tape, add one layer along the desired waterline, and then go ahead and add another layer on top of that, but let that overlap the first layer by about 3 or 5 millimeters. After having applied the third coat of barrier coat, you can go ahead and remove the outermost layer of masking tape. By doing that, the masking tape won't become permanently epoxied to the boat. And then after your final coat, you can go ahead and remove the last bit of masking tape. And that will leave you with a little bit of a tapered edge here, but that's okay. All of this is going to get covered up by anti-fouling. When applying the barrier coat, don't worry about the fact that the first 2 or 3 coats look a little see-through and patchy. Just keep going. This is 1 coat, 2 coats, 3 coats, 4 coats, and 5 coats. One last little tip. In my hands I have a bunch of handwritten notes. These are from my conversations with Wessex technical support. They're right there on the other side of the phone. They're some of the most friendly and knowledgeable people you'll ever meet. If you've got questions, just go ahead and call them. In fact, a lot of the tips I've just shared with you are from my conversations with Wessex technical support. The next step here aboard Athena is going to be to scrub the barrier coat to get rid of any amine blush before I abrade it. And for getting rid of the amine blush, you'll often hear people recommend Scotch-Brite pads. I think I want to try something very similar to these, but a little bit different. Ta-da! These are also Scotch-Brite pads, but they're the brown, slightly coarser version, and they're intended for use with power sanders. Just to be on the safe side, I am going to give the barrier coat a full 24 hours to cure before I start cleaning it and sanding it. So that means I'm going to have to wait until tomorrow to start using those new Scotch-Brite pads. But yeah, just consider this a little teaser for next weekend's video. Before I end this video, I want to thank those of you who left helpful suggestions as to how I could sand and fair this annoying radius in between the hull and the keel. What I ended up doing was to apply a little bit of fairing compound just by hand, letting that cure, and then using a piece of an old knee pad and some sandpaper just to manually sand that into a shape that looked acceptable. And well, I think I got away with it. If everything goes according to plan, then next weekend we're going to be applying cover coat to the hull. That is bound to be another long and strenuous day, but I'm hopeful that I might be able to get some more minions to join in with all the fun, and that should leave some more time for me to shoot video, which should make the video a little bit more doing stuff and not so much yammering on, but we'll see how that works out. And yeah, that is going to be it for this video. As always, feel free to leave a comment down below, and don't forget, if you've enjoyed this video, remember to leave a like. See you!